Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Art Basel, Miami Beach, Salon Talks. This is a discussion between the artist Julian Schnabel and Bonnie Clearwater, who is now NSU Museum of Art, Fort Lauderdale Chief Curator and Director. Enjoy.
Hello? That was a good introduction, nice and,
Nice and to the point.
yeah.
Julian, we've been just came from NSU Museum of Art. Okay, you can hear it? Oh, he's directing. Okay, is that good?
I don't know, ask them.
Can anybody hear? Okay, good. So we just came from NSU Museum of Art in Fort Lauderdale, where we have the amazing exhibition of Cafe Dali, Picabia, Schnabel, Williamson. And this has been a project that about almost 2 years ago you brought to my attention.
Can everybody hear her? Okay.
And as soon as you mentioned it to me, I said I wanted to show it. And when the exhibition opened at the Williamson Museum in Denmark, I took a plane, 2 trains, and a bus to get there. And when I saw the exhibition, I knew I had to bring it here. So it opened in October, and it's had an amazing response, and it's been quite a revelation. How did this show come about? I mean, I didn't curate it, but it was already in the works when we first started talking.
Hello, everybody. Anyway, I hope that you get a chance to see it. It is in Fort Lauderdale. It's not in Miami, but it's worth the ride. I actually went to Copenhagen to see it. There was, I was having a show in Germany at the CFA Gallery, and two Danish artists and a museum director that was the director of the Williamson Museum, which I had never heard of, asked me if I wanted to be in a show with J.F. Williamson and Francis Picabia. Well, I certainly knew who Picabia was, but I had no idea who Williamson was. And he was born in 1863, and he died in 1958. And so these, one of these artists started showing me images of his work, and there was one painting called The Marriage of the King's Son. It was painted in 1898, and sort of looked like a Malay painting. There were these, it was sort of in browns, these peasants holding some plates, getting ready to get served a dinner. And then in the middle of the painting, there was a Disney-like figure, like Prince Charming and his girlfriend, that he painted into the painting in 1948, 50 years later. And so that perked my interest, and I looked at some other ones, and he was a very idiosyncratic and I mean, I think his painting signaled a lot of things that happened in German painting in the 80s, and in fact, and in the 70s. And in fact, the people in Denmark thought his paintings looked too German at the time when he was working. But I guess he had a rich wife, and he didn't care, or he could be independent. So he made whatever paintings he wanted to make, and they're very, very bold and very curious, and they were a big revelation. I mean, he painted on the frames of his paintings. They looked sort of like Marcus Lupert's paintings or Martin Kippenberger paintings. And I mean, there was something that this guy was doing all by himself. And he did a lot of traveling also, so he made some paintings of Venice. And well, these guys had this idea that they would compare his life and Francis Picabia's late paintings and my work and the way that Francis Picabia lived and how I lived, and they had this crazy idea about time somehow, because Picabia was born in 1875 and he died in 1953. I was born in 1951. Why in the world would somebody think that a guy born in 1951 would contextualize what these people were doing? And even though Picabia was seen as a very serious artist in the late 30s, early 40s, basically the Dadaists sort of turned their back on him and thought that he was painting these sort of Gaga.
Gaga instead of Dada.
Yeah, Gaga instead of Dada. Works that were actually, for somebody that started painting abstract paintings at the beginning of the 20th century, to be painting calendar girl paintings in the 40s was a radical thing to do. And anyway, there were a lot of Picabia paintings in this exhibition that you've never seen. And I'm sure most of you have never seen a Williamson painting, and they're paintings of mine that you probably haven't seen also. And it's a big museum with a lot of space, and Bonnie did a great job. And that's about it.
You know, it's interesting that this exhibition, in which the paintings that dominate from you are what we might interpret as being figurative, in fact, in that there's images that we recognize in it. And couple that with the exhibition you recently had at Gagosian in New York, in which the paintings were all considered abstractions. And yet many of them were overlapped in time. And it seemed to me that there's really, it's as if it was two different artists working in certain respects, and in other respects, it's all the same type of painting, whether it's abstract or figurative.
Well, I guess there's one thing that is for sure, that they're physical, and they have to do with painting, and they're handmade, and I paint them. And I don't really see or haven't seen a big difference between figuration and abstraction for a long time. And so, 40 years at least. So, I think a painting can be whatever you want it to be. And I don't think there's any reason to make paintings that just have the same appearance as something else that you've done because you did that. And there was a time in the United States where artists looked for an irreducible image, which was the emblem of themselves. And so you have, if you think of, say, Mark Rothko, you could think of a painting with a fuzzy shape in the middle and fuzzy edges, rectangles that are floating in a larger rectangle. Or if you think of Franz Klein, you could think of big, bold black marks on a white ground, or Jackson Pollock pouring skeins of paint. I didn't find that for myself, that there was one thing that represented what I was. And I was just curious about different materials and ways of making paintings, and I had no preconception about what could be or should be the appearance of a painting. So as I discovered different materials, they evolved into what became the appearance of those paintings. At first, when I was younger and I started to paint and one painting didn't look like the next, I was a bit worried. And then later I realized it was a blessing.
No, it's interesting because you're saying that you were concerned that you couldn't find a iconic
Anina?
image.
Hello. She bought the first plate painting.
Oh, that's Nina.
Anina Nose, great art dealer, crazy, brilliant woman. Anyway.
It was interesting that you were concerned that you couldn't find an iconic image, and yet Picabia deliberately wanted to avoid it. He would do a kind of style and then deliberately break from it because he didn't want to be known for being the abstract painter or the Dada artist, or even these late, crazy, figurative paintings.
So in the search for making the anti-iconic and losing your identity, or in a sense, you can't help yourself. I mean, Arshile Gorky used to say that he wanted to paint Picassos, but they kept coming out looking like Arshile Gorkys. So there's something about the hand and the approach that even if the most obvious superficial coincidences don't occur between paintings, you can say, yeah, I know who made that painting.
Even in this show where we have 3 artists and they're all mixed together, it's quite clear who is who. Although sometimes it's a little difficult to tell the Williamsons and the Picabias apart. There's a lot of similarity.
They're also kind of similar in scale. So, but if you think of late Magritte, or you think of late de Chirico, or you think of most painters that get to live long enough to keep painting, they usually change their style. And or if you think of late Picasso, even though his late paintings weren't included at the big show at the Museum of Modern Art some years back, re-looking at those works, you see how great some of them are, and how I think there's good as pictures from 1909, 1914. I think he figured out a way to make a pictogram. And I think in a sense, Picabia's paintings, even though they look like, it's funny because he actually painted it in the opposite way than I do, because what he was doing was taking paintings or taking images out of a photo magazine and then painting them as if they were painted from life. And I paint from life when I paint figurative works. And but there's a whole, these people were very, very efficient. What was the name of the text about, do you have that book with you? I mean, just one of the, can we have, just for a second? Sorry for the trouble. But I just wanted to, I mean, I didn't write any of this. The show is called Hybrid Painting. And one of the articles is called Memory in the Archives of Its Technical Reproduction. And basically the show is named after this goat or this sheep named Dolly that was cloned. A stage for directing self-images, and they talk about self-portraits, but visual overdoses, transgression from within the paintings of Picabia, Schnabel, and Williamson. Anyway, these people got very, very deep into whatever they were thinking about, and it's actually worth reading. So I was very happy that Bonnie brought this show to the United States, and I think Williamson, even though he's been dead since 1958, I mean, the cavalry doesn't always show up. But art and life are incongruous to each other, and so even though he's dead, his art is alive, and that's kind of the thing about making art that is interesting, which is different than, it's a denial of death, which is different than life, because it's a representation of life instead of life itself, and life contains death, and a representation of life doesn't, and so it's a denial of death, and it's optimistic, whether it's tragic. It can only either be talented or mediocre, but it will always be optimistic.
You know, it's interesting you talk about, you know, the cavalry not showing up. And Williamson was an academic painter originally, and, you know, but he rejected it, and he very specifically was looking for creating his own visual vocabulary. You also could be, you know, just following along with the trends. as could Picabia, but you all rejected it. So the idea that people didn't follow along right away, shouldn't be surprising.
Well, what's interesting about it, if you look at the show in retrospect, I mean, I have a little bit of like 2020 retrospect for a couple of days, is that the trajectory of modernism seemed to be going a certain way, and went from figurative to abstract, and then it went from a certain kind of abstraction to formalism, to where there were everything that seemed to be not a formal issue was superfluous to what was in a painting. And young artists, people, wherever they are, they're going to get up and look at the world and say, you know what, I don't need this stuff. It's not working for me. I need to find my own vices or my own tools or my own way. And so I think that it's been a pretty consistent human activity that just seems to be cropping its head in a way now at the beginning of the 21st century. And it's not that work was reactionary to such a myopic focus, which was something like some kind of Greenbergian concept of what was happening in post-war American art. And so if you live long enough, you could kind of see anything. And
you mentioned the plate paintings before. I remember when I first saw them, it was in 1979 at Mary Boone's gallery. And it was such a big jolt to see these paintings that had such physicality to it. What made you move in that direction to make this very bold gesture at a time when painting, first of all, was declared dead for the most part? And if there was painting, it was flat, minimal, conceptual. And here's yours in a very physical type of work.
well, the fact is that I think what this show points out is that painting is conceptual. I mean, if you don't have an idea about what you want to do, you don't know where to begin. And the fact that something is physical doesn't make it mutually exclusive to be lack of thought. At the same time, when I'm painting, I don't want to think. So hopefully work that you make is beyond thought and really can't be described. You could decide how to begin or what kind of elements you could use, and there might even be elements that seem familiar to you at first, but by the time you get done with the accumulative effect of whatever the painting is, you might be in some place where you can't explain it at all.
I think that that's why you paint in the first place. There are emotions and thoughts that you can't explain in words, and it can only happen visually or physically
Yeah.
in the paint.
I mean, I think painting has to do with total freedom. You don't have to know when it's done. You don't have to know if it's good or bad when you stop. And for example, there's a painting in Bonnie's show that I made 25 years ago. I put it away for 20 years, looked at it 5 years ago and thought it looked okay. I didn't like it for 20 years. And if I made a movie and said to the people that produced it, listen, I'm going to put this movie away for 25 years, then we'll look at it, I don't think they would go along with me. And so I was talking with, I have a friend named Jean-Claude Carrier. He's a screenwriter. He wrote the Belle de Jour and all these Louis Buñuel movies, The Obscure Object of Desire. And he said that he and Louis Buñuel used to talk, and Louis Buñuel said, you know, there's this invisible guy, this invisible man who basically does the work. You do this thing and you leave it around for a while, and then the invisible man or the invisible woman, they work on it for a while, and the next time you look at it, you go, boy, the invisible woman, she did a great job, and then you accept what you did. It's hard to see what you're doing sometimes, But, instead of just making a speech or whatever, maybe it would be more interesting to have a conversation. Maybe people have a couple of questions about whatever. And I'm sorry that you haven't seen the show, because if you saw the show, we could actually talk about something specific. And another thing is that, out of all the people in this room, how many people have actually seen a big plate painting? Large one that's, say, 8 by 9 feet or 10 by 20 feet in real life. So what would you say? Out of this crowd, a third? I think the thing about paintings and in objects, you make these things, people have to go, stand in front of them, see them. You can't reproduce them. It's great to have a book. It's great to have an image of a painting. But like de Kooning said, a painting of a face is not a face. And so you got to go and stand in front of these things. My role as an artist, or for myself, is to try to put them in a situation where I think they look the best and where I could control how they're seen, at least while I'm alive. And I've had a lot of pleasure out of doing that. I've been lucky enough to put them into some places that I really, really liked, where maybe a lot of people didn't see them, but I put 3 22-foot square paintings in the Maison Carrée in Nîmes for 4 years. And they were in this provincial town in France, but it was a building that Caesar built for his daughter, and the scale of the pictures. I ended up showing them again in Venice a couple of years ago. But anyway, shall we just talk about anything? Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Yes, the girl in the middle with the arm.
Thank you. You had mentioned that that just because something is physical doesn't mean that there's not thought behind it. And I wanted just a glimpse of a personal experience that you had with that, with your work.
Well, that happens to me every day. Whatever I look at, I figure whoever built the damn thing had some kind of intention, whether it's a painting or it's a building, or. But I guess things have different uses, and then some. But even art, even though one would say the great thing about it is that it's useless, it's that ultimately or nobody needs it officially. It has a utilitarian purpose, and that is to alter your state. Somebody makes something, and they're going to put something in the world, and hopefully, after you see it, you'll be different. There'll be battles you won't have to fight. Maybe some of them will get solved. Maybe it will seem like nothing to you, and it won't affect you at all, but it will touch somebody. But I think that you have to use yourself as the guinea pig, and you make the art for yourself. And the notion of looking for agreement, or this whole ocean of the art market, and this. I haven't been to the art fair, except to come here and talk today. I find it extremely painful to walk through here and see everything. It's really hard to find something, because there's a cacophony of. Besides that, I don't know what's going on the street also. It's just like a. But I think that, you have to think of Joseph Beuys when he became the director of the Kunstakademie in Dusseldorf. He let everybody in, and it looked like Russia at the suprematist days. So if people are interested, it's great. I don't mean to sound too curmudgeon. It's just very hard to see things sometimes, and I think people have to, they're anxious for agreement, anxious to show things, but maybe there's better ways to do it.
Or when you mentioned the idea of this, invisible person making the work, I'm thinking of our exhibition, there's a whole section of the artist and the muse. Is this invisible person the muse?
No, 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 no. That person is actually you, but you don't know that's who you are because you haven't been that person yet. And that person is going to start living a parallel life to you that you're not aware of, working on that painting while you're doing something else. And the next time you see it, it's all the work that they did that you're going to see. It's definitely you, not the muse.
Divine intervention.
Well, it might be divine intervention, but it's self-generated. Anybody have a question? The guy with the arm?
One of the things that was interesting in your dialogue was about scale and about newness. I recently moved back to create some art pieces here to Florida, but in my journey here, my first stop was at the Diego Middle School, where these street artists are all volunteering to create these beautiful murals, talk about scale and talk about newness and talk about art that is political and has, to use an ancient word, pizzazz. I was very impressed, and much more that I discovered in the Wynwood section. Speak to the new artists, because I've watched street art grow up, and it's become pretty phenomenal.
Well, I think it's hard to talk about art in generalities. I don't even know what Wynwood is. Is that a
Section in
section
Miami.
of Florida, of Miami?
It
Okay.
has art warehouses.
Okay. But I saw an exhibition in Sao Paulo recently at a place called Maturasso. It was a hospital, an abandoned hospital. A French curator curated it, and a guy owned the building, let him do what he wanted to do in there, and there was some. It was a great. It's great to see people take over a space and revivify a space. I mean, there was one work, I don't remember the guy's name, but he built something to catch water on the roof. So there was a pool on the roof, and there was all these plumbing that was on the ceiling. So there was a room that was raining all the time. It was just constantly a room filled with rain. I thought that was pretty good. Then I was walking down the corridor, and there was this pile of palm trees and broken pots and dirt that were piled up, rotting in this courtyard. And I turned the corner, and there was a video, and it was a video of all these people throwing these pots, these potted palm trees, out of the windows of this hospital. And then they just piled up at the end, and what you got was what you saw when you passed by. I think that there are opportunities that people give, or spaces that people give to young artists. Sometimes they claim them for themselves. Sometimes it's organized in some way. But I think it's all about discovery and need. And I don't know really, everybody here has been in Brazil, I imagine, no? At some moment or another, or some people. The graffiti there is quite interesting. A lot of it's just black spray paint with elongated letters. It looks very, very, very militant. It's very, it's funny, different, the kind of graffiti that's in different countries. Because, but I'm no expert on graffiti. But the element of working on something that has already exists, and the thing maybe not being done, someone adding something to it, is something that has always been interesting to me, where there's different layers of meaning or different meanings that get commandeered for other uses. And maybe in a sense, even the plate paintings People ate off them. They were used for something else. I thought, okay, if we take them and put them on an armature and then I paint on top of these things, then their meaning is different. And then you can't really extract what's painted on them from what they are, so they're part of the same eidetic image. Anyway, anybody else have a question? Yes.
Any other arms?
Pardon?
Afterwards?
I don't know if I could have an interesting answer to that.
Can you tell us about your relationship with color, where color comes into it?
It depends on the painting. I was in Denmark driving through at 3 o'clock in the morning looking at the sky, and I noticed that sky was cerulean blue at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the clouds were kind of mineral violet. Made some paintings related to that, or spent time in warm countries, places like Mexico. I mean, color actually comes with material. Sometimes I use canvas that's covered boats, and it rained on them, so dirt and rain make the color, or a veil that's on there. Or I was driving down the road, and there was a truck that was broken down and had a army, it looked like army material. In Spanish, the word would be lonas, a lona, you know, and there were patches on it and things like that, and it was about 17 by 23 feet, and I asked the truck driver if he would sell me his truck cover. And so it was kind of a khaki green color, and then I got some more from 2 other truck drivers at a truck stop, and then I decided to make a group of paintings that were called Stations of the Cross, where I made 24 Stations of the Cross, and they were all painted on army materials that looked like, that were used to cover trucks. So that was a kind of green that, so a lot of times materials bring their own color with them. Or I'll find, I don't know, I've seen wallpaper, Dufour wallpaper, that I was attracted to, and that seemed to be a ground for something. But I think at one time, I thought that I needed to build a physical surface, a body for a painting. And years later, I kind of realized that something that was pictorial could be the architecture of that. So I started to paint on things that already had images on them. So I have a kind of, it's a very long-winded answer and a big question about color.
Julian, also there's a number of the paintings in our show are actually printed paintings. And somebody asked me today, well, how can it be a painting if it's printed?
How could it be a painting if it's printed? Well, how's that baby doing? I have a little son who's 1.5 years. Huh? Wonderful? Yeah, that's true. Baby stopped crying. Think they put something in his mouth? No. Printed things. Well, you know, with digital printing, you could do things that I found to be less sentimental and quicker than silk screen printing. And since Andy did such a good job with silk screens, it kind of covered that in a way. And when digital printing started to get good enough to where the pixels were quite small, or you could, I started to take images of paintings that already existed and print them on polyester and use that as a ground and then paint on top of that. And there's always a question about how you want to paint. I mean, really, the big question is, if we want to talk about what am I really interested in, or what could I give to you or talk to you about that means something to me? How do you paint? What do you paint? You look at most paintings, and they seem quite generic. So everybody's got to try to find a way to make a work for themselves that makes sense for themselves. So whether you find something that's been printed, and then you find a technique where you can print something on polyester, and then maybe you want the paint to, you want to work on a porous surface, and you want the paint to sit in it, you might use spray paint, or use ink and use water that will dissolve into it. On other paintings, you want paint to sit on the surface. And sometimes you can use something like in Bonnie's show in 1988, I spray painted on glass and put Damar varnish and linseed oil on glass, and then put them in front of these, they're not Maxime Duchamp photographs, they're Beauchamp, 19th century photographs of Egypt. And then I photographed that and printed that on with polyester, so there's no paint on the paintings, but the space that exists between the painted surface and the image that was on there is very odd, because there was a piece of glass in the middle, and part of it is very, very fuzzy, and another part of it is very, very, very crisp. And I keep looking for different ways of making marks. And some of the printing process has been taking a canvas and tying it behind a car and dragging it on the highway. And then the asphalt comes up into the surface because it's basically oil paint, petroleum. And you could print something like that to make a bigger mark. Or I took tablecloths and dipped them in oil paint that was wet and threw them at the canvas. So I didn't have a preconception of what the image would be, but it would look like a gravure. So I like it when I see something that surprises me. I mean, Chris Walken once said, if you can't surprise yourself, how do you expect to surprise anybody else? And I like that. And the great thing about making art is that you work on something, but you never know if it's really any good. You can keep looking at it and think it's good, but you're not sure. And you think, okay, well, am I going to do one more thing to this thing? Am I going to ruin this thing? And you go, yeah, I think I'm going to try to do this, and maybe I will ruin it. But if you're not willing to destroy it, there's no reason to make it. So I guess the only thing I could say is that I don't make art to illustrate what I know. I make it to find out something through the process of doing it. Anybody else? Yes? Yes? Say that again? What?
Your portrait of Placido Domingo, was it? Is it a classical portrait? How did it happen?
Seen it?
Oh, I love it.
Well, that's a funny story, because the people at the Metropolitan Opera asked me if I would make a painting of Placido Domingo, because they were going to reopen, and very busy. I said, yeah, well, I could do it in about 3 hours. So they said, okay, and we agreed on a price, and then he came over. He came over with about 10 people, dressers and people from the Metropolitan Opera, and his wife, and I wanted to paint him in costume. So he was dressed as Othello. So basically the way I do it is somebody stands in front of me, and the ground is painted dark, and I paint the light in. But what was happening is, as I was painting him, he kept getting into character, and he kept becoming a different person. And so I sort of got him right away, and then I absolutely was losing it. I mean, he was driving me nuts. I was looking at him, and he just kept being somebody else. So I was thinking, shit, you know, I'm supposed to do this in 3 hours. This painting is not going to look like him at all. They're going to bring it down from these wires at the Met. they're going to think this guy Schnabel can't paint his way out of a paper bag, and it was just a waste of time. Why am I in this position? Called my assistant, Bianca. I asked her to come over to the studio and said, listen, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, I want to walk out of this room, but I can't do this. What am I going to do? Anyway, thanks. She didn't say a word. She just stood there and let me talk to myself. So I looked at him. I said, "Okay, come on," and I did something. And I said, "Thank you. You can go home now." And what I did is I painted him out when he was there. I guess he thought, the guy's an abstract artist. He behaves this way, whatever. He didn't know what I was doing. He thanked me. Everybody left. And then I remembered exactly what he looked like, and basically painted what I remembered and did the painting in about 20 minutes. And then poured resin on it, and it's at the Met. But I did get, it's not, I don't know if it's more like movie making, putting yourself under the pressure of time than that. I think it was, I don't think he ever knew anything was wrong. He was very charming and very nice, but I thought I lost it for a while there. Yes. I'll get to you in a minute. Yes. Anybody want to leave? I won't think you're rude. I mean, I just got other stuff to do. Is there another act coming up here soon?
I was hoping you could touch on a little bit about your filmmaking, and was that almost a catharsis for expanding your expressionism of your existing painting, or was that a completely separate medium for you, and you see it as a completely separate piece of work?
Okay. I guess it's part of my process of being an artist, making the films, but I don't want my paintings to be movies, and I don't want my movies to be paintings. They're totally separate things. And but there's part of my brain that's a storyteller, and just things. I always wanted to make movies, and something happened. I mean, when Jean-Michel died, a guy came to interview me about him, and I thought I would help him get the movie done. He was a Polish film director, but he was a tourist and didn't know anything about the art world, and insisted on not learning anything about it. And basically, I bought the rights back from him and whatever money I gave him to do it, and I ended up rewriting the script and directing the movie. You said I did portraits based on the character? No. A lot of those people were friends of mine because they liked my paintings and they were interested in painting, and I ended up making a painting of Gary years later. And Dennis Hopper, who was a close friend of mine. But I think it's, we're living in a kind of situation where people get nervous if you do too many things. But you can't really think about that. I mean, you can or you can't. Depends on, the repercussions of what's that going to be. Can you afford to do that? I think people thought that I stopped painting or I wasn't interested in painting anymore, which was absurd. And I guess I haven't made a film since 2008, 2009. I wrote something. Johnny Depp gave me a book called The Hand of Dante by Nick Tosh. I wrote a script to that I might make sometime, but I mean, if I never made another movie, my life wouldn't change. But obviously I have to paint all the time, because if I didn't do that, I probably would go mad or very, very unhappy. This guy had a question, and then we'll.
You talked earlier about putting those pieces in Nîmes and having a context for the work that you develop.
Right.
That obviously is built into the buildings that you build or the films that you make. That's a fixed context within those, where those experiences are had and shown. how does that affect the way that you make art that you're ultimately going to sell and ends up in someone's home and is placed elsewhere, not in the context of your design? How do you deal with that issue? Or are there pieces that you design in a certain fashion so that they are forced into a certain context?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
No, thank you. First of all, having the privilege and the opportunity to make those 3 paintings for that space in Nîmes was an absolute interesting comparison. Marty Scorsese made The Goodfellas that year. I was in Paris and I saw the movie was packed. It was a great movie, and it was packed with people watching it, enjoying it. I drove down to Nîmes, and I walked into the room, and there were 3 people looking at those paintings. And I thought, this is the ecstasy that I've chosen. I thought about Hyman Roth saying, you know, this is the... And I also thought about that when I live in Montauk, and there's Paul Simon would put on this thing for the lighthouse every summer. And there were 10,000 people at the ranch watching Willie Nelson perform with Waylon Jennings and some other people. And my house was about 2,000 meters up the road. My studio is built outside. It's maybe half the size of this room. No roof on it. But if somebody would go by in a helicopter, they would see 10,000 people listening to that music. They would see a guy by himself painting 5 paintings. And so the deal is that there's some kinds of art that people are going to get. Millions of people will listen to it all at once. And whether it's music, film, whatever. People really have to walk up to the painting of the Duchessa d'Alba by Goya and see it in life. One-on-one kind of thing. Maybe I made paintings that, you know, people say your paintings are so big. Well, I painted them so I could see them, not so I could sell them. And maybe if I would have made paintings that were more saleable and smaller, they could fit over people's couches or in more domestic kind of thing. People would think that I was maybe less arrogant. And so I try not to think that, oh, I want to sell this. I need to make a painting to sell. So I'm going to make it 8 feet tall instead of 11 feet tall. If I want to make it 11 feet tall, I'll make it 11 feet tall. Sometimes I'll make paintings that are smaller and paintings that will fit in somebody's house, and I'm happy if they can. I don't have anything against people living in houses. But if you're a builder, okay, people build buildings, 4x8, standardized sheetrock, so they could build buildings quickly or whatever. People are living in 8-foot ceilings, 9-foot ceiling with whatever molding, whatever goes on. So there's a kind of standardized way of living that people are living in that has nothing to do with me. And why should I conform to those standards that I kind of set out to destroy in the first place? Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about you and your relationship to your public and collectors. You said earlier that sometimes you finish a work and you don't like it or you don't think it's good. Could we assume then that you wouldn't put that on the market?
Yeah.
You would keep it and
I would either destroy it or I would work on it until I think it's good enough. I mean, basically, I'm not going to be here forever. So if I am not here, my painting has to speak for itself. So I'm making paintings. In one case, when as a kid, I wrote on this thing, I'm making paintings to raise the dead, and thinking about that show with Picabi and Williamson. Well, those guys' paintings, you're looking at them now, and maybe paintings can raise the dead. But the other side is I'm being responsible for what I put in the world. I don't want to put any shit in the world just because you're going to buy it. I'm not going to cheat you, and I'm not going to cheat myself. Whatever I make, I'm responsible for. And I think that's a difference between, say, an artist and somebody that just makes stuff.
Well said.
Yeah? How are we doing here? We have to leave?
Yeah, we have to leave, but I just wanted to say that there are books.
I think this one guy's got a
on the
question.
side.
Let's not cut him off,
Okay,
and then we'll go.
let's make it, let's one more,
So,
squeeze it in quick.
Really short
Yeah.
question. What are some things that you wish you would have done differently when you were in your early 20s?
Things I would have done differently in my early 20s? Wow. Fuck, man, I can't even remember my early 20s. I can't answer that correctly because I would be talking to you from the point of view of somebody that's 63 years old. I'd have to give you an answer from my early 20s, and I'd be making that up, and I don't want to lie to you. So, what would I say to you? Are you in your early 20s? Okay, so don't listen to anybody about what you have to do, because you know better than anybody else, even if they're smarter than you or they think they are. You'll figure it out for yourself. And then just let things just kind of blow over you like a little breeze if things get rough. Don't kill yourself.